A major reason I want a 25th Century Star Trek show has nothing to do with Seven of Nine's new crew. With Star Trek, Picard Season 3 concluding in the early 25th century, I'm desperate for the franchise to pick up where the Patrick Stewart-led show left off, but not just because I want to see where Jerry Ryan's 7 of 9 timeline is headed. Of course, I'd love to see Captain Seven's adventures as the USS Enterprise G's commanding officer in the unconfirmed and much-desired Star Trek Legacy, but the possibility of a 25th Century Star Trek show makes me very excited for a completely different reason. Star Trek, Picard supplied me with a powerful bout of nostalgia by reuniting the Star Trek, the Next Generation cast for the first time in decades, but it also acknowledged the franchise's promising future when Picard Season 3's ending provided a brief glimpse into an untapped portion of the Star Trek timeline. While the 24th century will probably always be the saga's most beloved era, its proximity to the 25th century opens up so many brilliant possibilities that tie into pre-existing storylines, as proven by Star Trek, Picard's final episode. Hopefully, that potential doesn't go to waste. I want a live-action Star Trek, Lower Decks show set in the 25th century. Unless Star Trek, Prodigy Season 3 gets the green light, the franchise doesn't have any active shows set in the 24th century. So because Star Trek, Picard ended at the beginning of the 25th century, it would make sense if this era were set to become a main focus. If so, I would love to see the return of characters from Star Trek, Lower Decks in the context of a live-action show. Jack Quaid and Tawny Newsome reprising their Lower Decks roles in Star Trek Strange New Worlds proves a crossover between live-action and animated mediums works brilliantly well. Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5's ending was marketed as the show's finale, but it didn't feel like it. It seemed to be implying the show could still return at any point and continue the voyages of the USS Cerritos under the command of Captain Jack Ransom Jerry O'Connell. I'm sure I'm not alone in thinking it'd be unfair to the show's quality if that was the last time we ever saw those characters. They may not be able to return in their original format, but letting them venture into a live-action 25th century Star Trek show would be equally exciting. From a storytelling point of view, it would make perfect sense for members of the Cerritos crew to pop up in the 25th century. Sure, the various officers like Boimler and Mariner would probably have moved on to other postings so long after the end of Lower Decks, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't still be in active service. A sequel show with the same characters could easily bring the crew back together, given the right storyline. Plus, most of the original cast would be far more age-appropriate to reprise their roles in live action in the 25th century. Captain 7 of 9 and the crew of the USS Enterprise G would likely have encounters with Lower Decks figures like Rutherford Eugene Cordero and Tendi Noel Wells. Even if a true successor to Star Trek, Lower Decks never materializes, Captain Ransom and others who served aboard the Cerritos could and should still be folded into other 25th century stories. For instance, if Star Trek Legacy ever happens, Captain 7 of 9 and the crew of the USS Enterprise G would likely have encounters with Lower Decks figures like Rutherford Eugene Cordero and Tendi Noel Wells. If they didn't, it would beg the question of where they all were. Why Star Trek Lower Decks has to continue. The buzz around a potential 25th century Star Trek show has reached warp speed since the finale of Star Trek, Picard. Fans are understandably excited to see what adventures lie ahead for 7 of 9, captain of the newly christened USS Enterprise G. But while I'm just as curious as the next fan to see how Raffi, Jack Crusher, and Sidney Law Forge evolve under her command, that's not the primary reason I want a 25th century Trek series. For me, the real draw lies not in the new characters, but in the galaxy they now inhabit. I want a 25th century Star Trek show because the timeline is finally ripe for exploration again, not just in the literal spacefaring sense, but narratively. For decades, Star Trek has built a future that reflects our highest hopes and deepest fears. The original series imagined a post-scarcity society boldly exploring the unknown. The Next Generation refined that vision with diplomacy, ethics, and the challenge of moral ambiguity. Then, for a while, the franchise stopped looking forward. Instead, Trek became fascinated with its own past. From Enterprise to Discovery's first 2 seasons, and even Strange New Worlds, the franchise focused on prequels and retro aesthetics. These were often well-made and compelling, but they rarely moved the timeline ahead. Even Picard, for all its temporal placement, spent much of its time dealing with the past, old villains, returning heroes, long-dormant story threads. The 25th century represents a chance to finally start asking new questions instead of just answering old ones. What happens when a society that has achieved peace, abundance, and galactic influence starts to fray at the edges? How do institutions like the Federation evolve after centuries of success and a few catastrophic failures? The Romulan supernova, the Synth ban, the Dominion War, and now the Borg infiltration from Picard's 3rd season, these aren't isolated incidents. They're signs of change, cracks in the utopia that Gene Roddenberry imagined. A new series could ask, can the Federation adapt without losing its soul? There's also the matter of technology and its accelerating role in shaping culture. In the next generation, holodecks and replicators felt wondrous. By the 25th century, those marvels are normal. So what's next? What are the new ethical dilemmas when you can replicate entire planets or clone minds or harness dark matter? The scientific frontier has always been one of Trek's greatest strengths. A show set after all current canon gives writers the breathing room to go wild with speculative innovation without tripping over continuity. Then there's the rich narrative opportunity to redefine alien cultures. The Klingons have changed appearance more times than Worf can count. The Romulans were shattered by their star's destruction. The Borg were arguably dismantled in Picard's final season. And the Cardassians, Dominion, and even the Ferengi have been through radical transformations. In the 25th century, these species don't have to follow old tropes. The canvas is clean, and the politics, alliances, and threats can be completely reimagined. Another compelling reason is tonal freedom. Earlier Trek series each had a mood, from the optimism of TNG to the moral gray of DS9 to the cowboy diplomacy of TOS. A 25th century show doesn't have to mimic any of these. It can reflect our current anxieties, the pace of technological change, climate upheaval, societal fragmentation. Or it can offer a vision of collaboration, discovery, and growth. That's the real beauty of going forward. You can choose what kind of future to paint, not just recreate a past aesthetic. And perhaps most exciting of all, the legacy characters can finally step aside. We love them, truly we do. But Star Trek has been caught in a gravitational pull of nostalgia. As much as it's been wonderful to see Picard, Riker, Janeway, and Seven again, the storylines often feel like curtain calls. A 25th century series can break that pattern. It can give us characters whose motivations aren't wrapped around their famous predecessors, who aren't the children of icons, who don't exist to finish someone else's arc. That doesn't mean completely ignoring the past, but rather letting it inform rather than define the present. So yes, I'm looking forward to what 7 of 9 does with the Enterprise G. I'm eager to see Jack Crusher step out of his father's shadow, and to watch Sydney LaForge develop a legacy of her own. But more than that, I'm craving a series that takes us beyond the echo chamber of nostalgia. I want Star Trek to remember that its greatest frontier has never just been space, but time. Not just where we go, but when.